I found a tracking device hidden in my car. I didn't know what to do with it at first, so I stuck it to a freight truck heading for Canada just to see what would happen. And now, I've just gotten one of the weirdest phone calls of my life. Have you ever had a moment where your brain jumps to the most insane conclusion because the situation feels too bizarre to be real? That's exactly where I'm at right now. I feel completely stuck, like no matter what decision I make next, it's bound to be the wrong one. I'm starting to suspect my wife might be involved in something that doesn't make any sense. And no, it's not cheating. I know infidelity is the usual suspect in situations like this, but honestly, I don't think that's what's happening, or at least I really hope it's not. The problem is, I have no idea what is happening, and that's what's driving me crazy. Let me back up a bit. My name is Mark, and I've been married to my wife, Melissa, for 5 years. Melissa has her quirks, but overall, she's an amazing partner. She makes me happy, and I do my best to make her happy too. I have a solid job that pays well, but the catch is I travel a lot. For me, the trade-off is worth it. But Melissa has never liked it. She's not a fan of being apart, and to be fair, I can't blame her. Still, she can be a bit paranoid. She wasn't like this when we first started dating. Back in college, we were just friends at first, but we clicked right away. She was one of the only people I trusted enough to really open up to, aside from my childhood best friend, Liam. Liam and I have always been close. We've been best friends since middle school, and even now, he's married and lives nearby, so we still hang out a lot. But over time, Melissa and I grew closer too, and eventually we started dating. At first, she seemed perfect, almost too perfect. I remember being nervous about that, like maybe she was hiding something. But we'd known each other for so long that I figured I'd notice if there were any red flags. A few years later, we got married and moved in together. That's when I started to notice the cracks. Melissa has this way of worrying about everything. She doesn't try to hide it either. A few months into our marriage, she admitted to me that she felt insecure, especially about my work trips. She said she hated the idea of me being so far away and worried that someone might swoop in and take me away from her. I won't lie. It was flattering at first. Having someone care about you that much, it's kind of sweet. But as time went on, it started to get a little exhausting. She constantly wanted to know where I was, what I was doing, and who I was with. It wasn't always easy to deal with, especially when I missed a call, and she assumed the worst. We'd argue about it sometimes, but I tried to remind myself that it came from a place of love. The thing is, a relationship like this takes patience. Melissa's insecurities didn't just disappear overnight, and I had to learn how to handle them without making things worse. Honestly, if it had been anyone else, this marriage probably wouldn't have lasted. But somehow, we made it work, or so I thought. Melissa even jokes sometimes that she's lucky to have me, and I always agree. It's part of our dynamic. She gets upset about my travel schedule. I make her laugh, and we move on. But this week was different. A few days ago, I found out I needed to take a last-minute trip for work. It wasn't just a short drive either. It was pretty far, and I'd be gone for 2 days. Melissa wasn't happy about it, of course. She pouted and made a big deal about how much she was going to miss me. It's her thing. She does it every time I leave, because she knows I'll spend extra time convincing her that everything's fine. So I did what I always do. I promised we'd go to her favorite restaurant when I got back, and eventually she gave in. We spent the day before my trip having fun and laughing, and by the time I left the next morning, I thought everything was fine. That afternoon, I had my meeting, checked into my hotel, and settled in for the night. Everything seemed completely normal. The next morning, while I was packing up to leave, one of my coworkers called. He said he'd lost his ring and thought he might have left it in my car. Since he'd already flown home, I told him I'd check my car before heading out and let him know if I found it. And that's when everything started to unravel. So I stopped at a gas station and started searching every nook and cranny to find it. While I didn't find the ring, which my coworker later explained had fallen somewhere else, I discovered something very, very interesting under a spot I never would have looked unless I was searching for a tiny object. I found a small device that looked suspiciously like a tracker. At first, I was just guessing because it couldn't be anything else. Even though it was deep under the seat, it couldn't have just fallen there. It was securely placed, which really surprised me. Now, I'd understand if I were an important person or something, but I'm not. My company always knows where I am because I go there for work, so there's no reason to track me. My wife knows where I am at all times, so she has no reason, and besides the two of them, no one else has access to my car. Well, Liam does, but he has even less reason to do something like that. So I looked up exactly what it was just to be sure, and it was definitely a tracker. After the initial shock, the tracker really scared me because why would someone want to know where I am? Since I knew it couldn't be anyone close to me, I felt that the tracker had been placed by someone who wanted to harm me, my family, or my company, or do something equally bad. I know it sounds a bit silly to assume something like that, but can you blame me? A tracker isn't a normal thing to put on someone. After getting scared, I thought the best thing would be to trick the person tracking me for a day. My thinking was that if I was in any immediate danger, I'd be dragging my wife into it by going home. So I told the company I had some issues and would return tomorrow. I told my wife I had extra work, then drove around for a while to see if anyone was following me. I used everything I'd seen in movies in situations like this, because I never thought I'd go through something like this. After a while, I was sure no one was following me, so I went back to the hotel to think. The most incredible part of all this is that it was someone I didn't even know. So how did they place the tracker? No one else touches my car besides me, my wife, and my best friend. And my wife is the one who cleans it. She does it because she loves cleaning. So it was clear to me that it wasn't possible for someone to place it without one of us noticing. While I was thinking about this, my wife called to ask me where I was. That was very strange, because I had obviously already messaged her. And although she's paranoid, she'd normally just understand. But suddenly, she started doubting me, saying I'm a liar, and kept asking where I was going. This seemed very odd to me, considering I'd just thrown away a tracking device. You see, I'd shown her via video call that I was still at the hotel, and only then did she half believe me. Now this made me suspicious of her, because it's possible that her distrust of me led her to put a tracker in the car, and she's the only person I think could do it successfully without me noticing. But on the other hand, it's one of the most absurd things because I've never done anything to fuel her distrust, so she has no reason to go that far. Besides, my loving wife would never do this because she'd think about how I'd feel when I found out she doesn't trust me at all. Now, I don't like the idea that it's my wife, so I decided to let it go and go home. But I didn't go home with my car, just to see what would happen. I left it at another friend's house, and then went home. My wife got very angry with me and kept asking me to tell her the truth. She refused to believe that my car had broken down and was in the shop for a few days. What baffles me the most is that she didn't even stop to think carefully whether I was lying or not. You'd think that after all these years, she'd know when I'm lying, but it was like she already knew, to the point where she just had to not believe me. As much as I hate to think about it, this has made me even more suspicious of her. But I don't want to believe she'd be capable of doing something like this. If it is her, then it means she doesn't trust me at all, even after so many years of knowing everything about me. So, folks, please tell me what I should do. Update 1. 2 weeks have passed since my last update, and yes, I made a decision. I don't know if it was the right one or not, but unfortunately for me, it increasingly seems like I should have let this whole thing go when I had the chance. Because of what's just happened, I think I've awakened a bear that's going to destroy my relationship. Let me explain. I thought a lot, and I don't mean a day or two. I thought about my decision constantly for a week, a few days after my post. My wife's anger disappeared. She apologized for her behavior and said she was just worried that her intuition told her something had happened. She asked me once more if anything had occurred, and I said no. Then she asked me to bring the car back, so I did, and she seemed somewhat surprised by that. Now, it was easier to suspect my wife when she was angry with me, but as soon as she went back to being her loving self, suspecting something like this became 1,000 times harder. Every time I considered the possibility that she was behind this, I ended up feeling very guilty. On several occasions, I was about to tell her everything, but something told me I needed to investigate further. After much thought, I decided I needed to dig deeper, but the problem was that I'm not cut out for things like investigations. I knew that no matter how much I followed clues, I wouldn't be able to find anything. That's why I contacted a friend I made through work, Dave, the private investigator. I've used Dave's help many times for work-related matters, so I thought he'd be the best option to find out what was happening. I contacted him, and we met. He scared me a bit with a warning as soon as he knew this was something personal. He told me I needed to be prepared to face the consequences because he might find anything. I agreed and told him everything that had happened. After listening, he gave me the warning again. He said he was sure I wouldn't like what we were going to discover and asked me once more if I was sure. I'm not going to lie. The second time he warned me, it scared me more. I felt like he was only saying that because he was sure my wife was involved. I mean, if anyone can have a better idea in this situation, it's him, right? Even so, I told him to go ahead because I think it's better to know than to remain in the dark. But now, a week later, I'm regretting it a bit because it seems like it's something really big and not just about suspicions about my wife. Today he called me and said he needed a few more days. He said he already had almost everything, but that some pieces of the puzzle were missing, and he wanted to complete them before telling me. Then he told me that until he did, I should prepare myself to receive devastating news. This saddened me a lot because it confirmed that my wife did this. So I told Dave that I was already prepared to hear that, but Dave simply told me that it was much worse than we had both imagined and hung up the call. I'm really scared to find out what's going on, and I'm pretty sure my relationship could end based on his reaction. I'll let you know when Dave tells me what's happening. Update 2. Oh my goodness, everyone. Dave was absolutely right. I wasn't prepared for the information he gave me. For those of you who supported my wife, get ready to be shocked. It's been a few weeks since my last update. About a week after writing the previous one, Dave asked me to meet. He apologized for what he was about to tell me. And at that moment, I was so scared that I was trembling. Then he told me that my wife wasn't the only one behind the tracking, and that my best friend Liam was also involved in the plan. At first, I was confused until he explained that those two were sleeping together, and the tracker was to know my location at all times so they could get away with it. I was stunned. I couldn't even speak. Dave kept talking. He said he had no idea how long this had been going on, but guessed it wasn't less than a year. He showed me some photos of them kissing in Liam's car, and I immediately started crying. You have no idea. These are the two people in my life I trust the most. Liam is practically family, and his wife is like a sister to me. I couldn't believe it. Not just the fact that my wife did this, but also my best friend. Then Dave said he wasn't finished, and unfortunately, there was more bad news. For the past few months, my wife had been mentioning that she wanted me to give her the house where my parents live. As soon as I started making money, I bought a big old house for my parents, and when I got married, Melissa and I moved into the house they gave me. I told Melissa I could transfer our house into her name, but she wanted the big house. She said she didn't want to move there or anything. She just wanted to own it. She made it seem like it was about being fair since we both have a house, and since I never thought we'd separate, I agreed. I told her we'd do it in a few months, and then never thought about it again. And she didn't remind me, probably to avoid raising suspicion. So Dave tells me that her plan is to take the house, kick my parents out, and then leave me. I couldn't believe him because my wife isn't like that, but when he showed me a recording that wasn't very clear, I had to believe it. Honestly, if none of this had happened, maybe I wouldn't have believed him. But since I'd already discovered so much, I had absolutely no other choice. After that, Dave asked me what I was going to do. I told him I didn't know, that I was going to think about it. But at that very moment, I'd already decided that I wasn't going to let her and Liam get away with it so easily. I treated them like they were my own family, and they just played me. You know, I would have taken a bullet for either of them. And I can't even put into words how much it hurts to discover the truth. I think you can understand why I decided to get revenge, right? So after that, I placed small recorders, the ones Dave recommended, all over the house and in our cars. And you know, these recorders are very good. I also put some hidden cameras to get as much evidence as possible. My plan is simple. I'm going to make fake documents and give the house to my wife. Obviously, after that, she won't wait long to execute her plan. And when she does, I'm going to expose her and my best friend in front of everyone. Update 3, I finally have some good news to share. It's been over 2 months since my last update, so I'll get straight to the point. A week after my last update, I had everything I needed. So I told my wife that I'd made arrangements to give her the house. A few days later, my wife reminded me, and I told her that I'd already arranged it and had started the process to transfer the house to her. I signed the fake papers and gave her the house, and she seemed happy. During the whole process, I hadn't spent time with Liam in weeks, and it was getting weird, so I forced myself to go out one night with him. Every second was hell, but I did it because I knew that, in the end, I'd get my revenge. My wife waited a few weeks and then executed her plan exactly as I expected. She went to my parents' house and kicked them out, claiming she was leaving me, and that the house belonged to her. Obviously, I acted as if I didn't know anything about what she was doing. I contacted my in-laws and went to confront her along with my parents and hers. I also called Liam and asked him to come to my mother's house to help me with the mess. I did this at a time when I knew his wife was with him, so he had to come with her. Let me tell you, both my wife and Liam were quite happy because they didn't know I had a foolproof plan and a little surprise up my sleeve. When I arrived at the house with our parents, Melissa's mother asked her what she was doing, and my wife began to tell a victim story. She said I was a terrible husband who drank all the time and hit her whenever I felt like it. She also said that I forced her to get rid of babies even though she wanted to have children. She made sure to tell everyone that that's why she tricked me into giving her the house and that now she was leaving me. She acted so well that she seemed worthy of an Oscar. And then, right on time, Liam and his wife arrived. It turns out Melissa was expecting her friend, Liam's wife, and it was all part of their bigger trap. I kept acting as if I didn't know anything and asked Melissa what she was doing. I told everyone, no, this is a lie. Then Liam stepped forward and told our families that Melissa was telling the truth and that he had witnessed some of those things. He said she had asked him for help, and although he loved me, he couldn't stop me from becoming a monster. Well, I have to admit, they did it quite well again, and the family seemed convinced at that point. So you know what? I thought that was enough drama and asked them to tell the truth, or I would. Of course, they didn't give in. So I told everyone how Liam and Melissa were sleeping together and how all this was part of their plan. It was very amusing to see them confused, since there was no way I could know this. Then I showed the truth, including recordings, photos of them kissing, and even videos of them meeting behind my back. Dave also gave me a lot more evidence, which helped a lot. My part was practically over as soon as it started because I had overwhelming proof. Melissa's parents just stared at her in astonishment, and when she tried to explain herself, her mother slapped her right then and there. At that moment, Liam was trying to say something to his wife, and he also got slapped. I told Melissa that the papers were fake and that we were done. She started crying. My mother-in-law told Melissa that she was cutting her off from the family and didn't want to see her again. I told her she'd soon receive the divorce papers. When Liam's wife told him they were also over, he got furious with me and tried to hit me. Well, I grabbed him and threw him to the ground. My father called the police, and Liam was arrested. And although Melissa begged a lot, we kicked her out of the house. My mother-in-law is now apologizing to me, and I told her it's not her fault at all. When I got home, I found Melissa waiting to beg me, saying she had nowhere to go. I told her I didn't care. It's been almost a month since then. And where? Well, in the middle of divorce proceedings. Liam's wife also moved out and filed for divorce. Liam isn't doing well. You won't believe this. He contacted me a week ago to ask for help. He said he needed help paying the bills and begged me to help him as his old friend. I told him he didn't deserve the word friend. Even enemies would have done less, and I let him suffer. The last I heard of Melissa, she tried to return to her family, but no one accepted her. Her parents made it clear to everyone that she was no longer part of the family. Then she lived with some friends, but they couldn't help her much and kicked her out after a few weeks. Now she's practically homeless. Anyway, I'm fine. As fine as someone in my position can be. Update 4. I'm only making this update because many people have asked how my life is and if I finalize the divorce. And yes, everything seems better, especially because I'm no longer legally tied to that woman. The divorce was finalized 3 weeks ago, and they've been the best 3 weeks I've had in a long time. Liam's and his wife's divorce ended before mine, and if he was already suffering from a lack of money, now it's much worse because he has to pay alimony. I know that Liam has tried to get back with my ex-wife because during one of the divorce hearings, she told me she no longer saw him and that we could start over. But I replied that yes, we'd start over, but each on our own path. She started crying audibly, and her lawyer had to console her, all while she looked at me as if I were the villain in all this, which I found amusing. My lawyer then suggested I speak as little as possible with her. And that's what I did. I don't understand why my ex-wife thinks that telling me she no longer sees him is enough for us to get back together. That's not what I'm looking for with this divorce. I just want to get away from her. And I know many have called me naive for not seeing the signs, like the fact that my ex-wife controlled me when I went on trips. According to many, that should have been the first sign to get out of this marriage. But let me tell you something. For people on the spectrum, it's hard to see these things. That's why it's easier for me to work with computers and servers, which is what I do, especially when I travel, because they're easier for me to read. That was my choice when studying at university because, as you can see, I couldn't have been good at negotiating and reading people's intentions. Anyway, I don't want to justify myself. I just wanted to explain why all this hasn't been so easy for me. I wish it could be different, but it's something I've lived with all my life. I could tell many stories about people who've taken advantage of that, but I'd be straying from my main issue now. I also wish people wouldn't take advantage of it, but at least I'm not so naive as to believe that everyone will be good to me, and everything will be easier. I didn't expect it from my own wife, who had sworn to love me and be faithful and betrayed me. So my expectations are now much lower. But I won't deny that this has happened to me many times in life, and I can't promise it won't happen again. Although I don't want to end this story without talking about Liam, because it's another of the most frequently asked questions in my posts. And although I've already said he lost the case, at least in terms of alimony, I wanted to add that he's living in a pretty bad place, or at least that's what his ex-wife told me. She and I have been in communication throughout this process, since I had much of the information she used for her divorce. This has allowed me to know what's happened with him. I can also tell you that she's already met someone. And from what she told me, Liam hasn't been too happy to find out this news. Apparently, after everything blew up, he asked his ex-wife for forgiveness several times. But she, like me, didn't accept it. As for whether my ex and Liam are together now, I don't know. There's no one who can tell me anything about it since I don't talk to my ex, and Liam's ex-wife doesn't know either. Edit. That's right. I forgot to mention the outcome of the divorce with my ex. Well, she didn't have to pay alimony, and the house I gave my parents was in their name. Also, the house that was originally my parents' I was going to inherit at some point, so she couldn't claim that either. In short, she left with very little from our marriage due to her infidelity.